Welcome to Snippets of Wisdom with your host, Dr. Mike Corral and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Snippets of Wisdom is the boomer's gift to the next generation and to the world at large. Dr. Michael J. Murphy and Coach Dr. Mike Corral are experienced psychotherapists, writers, and healers who find the greatest satisfaction in sharing the benefits of a lifetime of struggle and learning. Coach Mike has spent decades spreading deep wisdom and supporting youth through the juvenile justice system. Dr. Michael has directed mental health services at many correctional centers and testified in countless trials as an expert in sex-related issues and mental illness. And he was one of the 500,000 humans at Woodstock. So now, please welcome the hosts of Snippets of Wisdom.
Welcome. Welcome to Snippets of Wisdom. I'm Dr. Mike Corral, and with me is my co-host, Dr. Michael Murphy. Today we have an interesting show for you because there's an interesting phenomenon that we don't really understand. The question is, how could there be people that are experiencing loneliness in a world of more than 8 billion people? We're going to unpack that whole concept. We're going to take a look at, first of all, how we define loneliness and does it really consist of. So together, we're going to be drawing from our professional experience and personal experience to help to answer some of these questions for you. I want to encourage all of you to listen and comment on the show if you're watching the show live. Also, like and subscribe to this show to help us get more relevant information to you as individuals and to help you get the answers that you're looking for in your life. So welcome, Dr. Murphy, to the show. We've got an interesting topic to talk about today, don't we?
It's great to be with you again, and this is one of the deepest human sorts of contacts and topics that we could talk about, is this issue of human connectedness and human relatedness and the feelings of loneliness that so many people experience these days in this world. And we're going to get deep into the weeds with regard to where this comes from, what it feels like, how it affects people, and what are some of the things that we can do to try to ameliorate those
Yeah.
deep feelings of self-worth and value that are so much a part of the feeling of loneliness.
Yeah. There's a big gap between, the actual contact that we have with each other in social circles and the desired level that we're looking for. For some of us, we want more connection. Others of us, find, comfort in solitude. But the idea is, why does loneliness exist? And there's different kinds of loneliness too, that we it would be beneficial for us to explore. We got emotional loneliness, we have social loneliness, and what they call existential loneliness.
Mhm.
What
One of the
do you?
things that I really wanted to talk about in the beginning is the fundamental underpinnings of our need for relatedness with others. And in order to understand that, I think that each one of us needs to go back and think about the family situation from which we emerged. So as they say, all of us came from somewhere, right? So if you think back into your family of origin, what was it like? Where were you in the birth order in your family? What was the sense of security that you had at the time that you were growing up as a small child and as an infant and as a young child, as an adolescent? What were the circumstances in your home as you were growing up in terms of your sense of being seen and being cared for? Because the fundamental need that we have as human beings, first and foremost, is for safety. As they say, the first primal need that human beings have is to know that we are safe. We're going to be okay for the next 5 minutes, the next 5 hours, the next day, the next 5 days. No, we really want to know that we are secure. And that's the feeling that we really want to have in that sense when we're growing up. And yet, as the boomer generation, you and I well know, and many others of the millions and millions of boomers out there know, that many of us were not uh, in circumstances that were particularly safe. And
Right.
we all come from a generation in which many of us were not wanted. I mean, birth control did not even really exist back then. So parents, I know from immediate experience, oftentimes did not necessarily want the children that they were having. They sought
Yeah.
to avoid um, pregnancy in ways that were ineffective. So they ended up having children, many children, who were unwanted. If you think about it, what is the percentage of children of the boomer generation who were quote unquote unwanted?
Good
And I
question.
would probably guess maybe 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, maybe more were actually not children who, if they had total control, the parents would have chosen not to have. So I know in my case that was true. Later on when I was older in conversations with my mother, she was able to let me know, and she was the kind of engaging human being who could actually tell you that you were unwanted in a loving way,
Oh,
which you would still feel
talk
kind of
about
cool
bittersweet.
having the information. Yeah. Right. So I think that's the fundamental things for people to look back on. Look back on your situation and see what the situation was like for you in terms of the sense of security and safety and being wanted that you had in your family of origin when you were a small child. Because
Right.
that's going to define that sense in your psyche, in your mind, in your soul, if you will, in
Mhm.
your personality about whether you feel like you are okay in this world. You are wanted, you are loved. And that sort of creates the foundation that is later affected by all the circumstances of our lives as we grow up with regard to our relationships with others and
Right.
whether we feel lonely or feel just fine being
Yeah,
alone.
a lot of people don't know that they are impacted by that whole issue of when you were born, whether or not you were planned on, whether you were wanted. That's going to follow them all of us throughout our life, unless we decide uh, on some journey of self-actualization, which is totally possible, which you have done, to become the success that you are, and what many people are doing, is taking on the reins and putting themselves at cause in their life, you know. But I want to talk a little bit more about the idea and the impact of being unwanted. That is, for me, that just seems like, you know, and not to say that I've never experienced that, because I know what that's like. But talk a little bit about how devastating that is and what it actually does to our sense of purpose.
Yeah, I think that if you were one of the many, many millions of people who were unwanted, then you grow up with this sense, this sort of predetermined biological hardwired sense that you are not valued, you are not loved, your very existence seems to be superfluous. So
And
you're
this,
always compensating for that. And I think that's a hard thing to escape when you feel like fundamentally, gee, so, some very significant others really would rather it was the case that I was not even here. And so you're always compensating, seeking to, maybe people who are extremely approval seeking then. They really
yeah,
want to figure out some way to determine their value, to be the best, or to find love, the desperation to find acceptance somewhere, because they have this fundamental underpinning that many of us have, many of us boomers have, and many others, of just fundamentally not being wanted. It's a deep psychological woundedness that many of us have
yeah.
deeply hardwired into uh, our
That brings up
personalities.
a good question. Do you think that it was negligence on the part of the parents or not caring enough? Were there restrictions that made people feel like they had to have the children? What are some of the things that contributed to that feeling of not wanting? Because it's hard for me to imagine giving birth to somebody that you don't want on purpose. You know what I mean? For
Yes.
some people, it happened by mistake, and yet parents said, "Oh well, we'll make the best of it," in the back of their mind. They never said that to the kid. Oh yeah, we totally wanted you. You know, um, even though you were a change of life baby, or you were a mistake, or you weren't supposed to happen, you weren't planned. You know, how do those things happen, especially in our generation?
Even when you think about your use of the word mistake, like you would think that your
Yeah,
parents might have thought, "Oh, this is a mistake. We
we want
really didn't want
pregnancy.
that kid." So you're actually being born, and as you're emerging, there's some sense in which your parents are going, "Oh, darn, I have to deal with this mistake." So you feel like on a fundamental level, it's sort of communicated in the family that your very existence is
So it's
somehow
not
wrong.
something that you have to know about as a fetus for it to
Right,
impact you.
right.
You know,
It's a
it's at a
subtle.
cellular level and at a cosmic level, right?
Exactly, exactly. It's a cosmic vibrational sense that
Yes.
permeates the whole family,
Yeah.
permeates the relatedness between the mother and the child, father and the child, of just, the fact that you were an unintended consequence of
Right.
of the
Consequence.
actions that they engaged in, unintended, unmeant, and unsought for, and yet there you are. So you talk about existential loneliness. One of the terms that are used in existential philosophy. I majored in philosophy in college and love philosophy and urge everybody to get involved in philosophy. It's just an
For sure.
endlessly wonderful and interesting field. But one of the terms that existential philosophy uses is thrownness, that we're all fundamentally thrown into this world, into situations over which we, of course, have no control. You don't choose which family you're born into, which
Right.
country you're born into, which world you're born into, which universe we're born in. We don't know any of that stuff. We're just there. That's called thrownness. And the
Mhm.
thrownness of our existence is simply the situations in which we find ourselves without our
And what do you
consent.
do
We
about
didn't ask for them. We didn't create them. We're thrown into it. And so that really emerged a lot in World War I when existential philosophy really began, and they understood the circumstances of World War I when millions of young men were being thrown, literally thrown into the front lines of the war in World War I to an almost certain death when they were mowed down by machine gun fire, just thrown into that situation. And then the absurdity of that situation really became clear at that time, that people started to think, how absurd is this life when we're
it?
thrown into this world just to grow up and become soldiers and be cast into this meat grinder of a war situation where death is uh, pretty much certain and imminent and painful. So that's sort of the foundation of the existential philosophy of how suffering seems to go along so often with um, our origins. And so, yeah, so that's
It's,
not a
it's
choice we have. And we're going to talk a lot more about how those factors affect, our fundamental wiring with regard to
yes.
loneliness.
I want to talk about that cause and effect when we come back, right? How much time
Thank you.
are we going on? Are we going on commercial break right now, Zach?
Yeah, I think.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorick, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorick has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back. So we're talking about being thrown into this situation where we really had no choice in the matter. We were not at cause in the matter. And at some point in our life, we begin to make sense of what's happening. And sometimes it's not happening at a conscious level. But for some reason, we decide that we're going to make something of this thrownness, and we're going to do something towards self actualization, if you will. You mentioned Dr. Murphy. You mentioned the existential loneliness, and what happens when you decide that that's not what you want. That's not the kind of connection that you want. Can you describe the loneliness part of that existential thing we touched on before the break?
Yeah, one of the fundamental aspects of existential thought and philosophy is, uh, as we talked about, that we are thrown into this world. We don't really get to choose how our circumstances are constructed, but that's where we are. But one of the things that they would assert is fundamental is that anything that we are, we need to create. So the meaning that we have and the significance that we have is not something we're going to discover out there. There's no magical place where we're going to find it. We have to create it. So
Yeah,
it's this fundamental process with regard to our meaning and value and worth and our sense of being wanted is that we have to create that for ourselves. And that is really a fundamental realization that many people don't have. I mean, they're looking for that outside themselves. But like today, and we're going to talk more about social media and all the stuff when people get
yeah,
involved with searching for their significance somewhere else, the likes by other people, recognition by other people, being famous, being popular, that kind of thing, as
yeah,
being an external source, rather than finding it within yourself and learning what it would take to be good company for yourself. I mean, some people really enjoy their own company. So these are
yeah,
people who are able to be alone and they seem pretty content. They're able to do things, experience their lives, experience the day, whether it's going for a walk or having a cup of coffee or maybe talking on the phone with a friend or maybe having no contact at all, and yet they enjoy
yeah,
the process of being alone. So there's there's solitude and then there's loneliness, and really differentiating between those two
yeah.
phenomena is just really, really important.
I think it's a healthy mind is more likely to feel good and to feel safe and satisfied with solitude to some degree or some level of solitude, as opposed to someone who is chronically lonely, chronically disconnected. You know, I wanted to talk about the cognitive patterns that cause loneliness. There's uh, a few different things that happen in the way we form our patterns as a result of being thrown into this situation. One of them is mind reading, assuming that others are thinking negatively about us, for example, or making assumptions that are not necessarily true. For example, believing that people at a social event don't like you or don't want you there or whatever. These are assumptions that take place. Can you talk a little bit more about some of those other patterns that cause this or distort our perception socially?
Really, that sort of thing goes along with the existentialism part in the sense that we create the reality that we
Yeah,
inhabit.
right.
So just understanding that the world that we are in is the world that we have created and that we really need to create, that there is not going to be meaning is not something we're going to discover there. We're going to have to create it for ourselves. So the kind of situation that you're talking about when we um, see negative circumstances in other people's thoughts about us is called projection. It's a psychological defense mechanism that's very, very, very common. We really
Right.
project onto the world, into the community, a sense of their understanding of us that relates directly to our own psychological insecurities and needs, right? So if we grow up in a situation in which we feel unwanted and unvalued, we're much more likely when we get into social interactions to feel like other people don't really care about us and they probably don't even want to be with us. That's projection. So we
Yeah,
can realize that we do have some ability to influence that. We can take control of it. We can actually do things to be more self-supportive and to um, give ourselves uh, the kind of kindness and recognition and thoughtfulness that we would like to have from others. And
yeah,
so that's really the dynamic of forming a sense of emotional autonomy that we call independence, kind of psychological and emotional independence. And autonomy is when we feel strong in ourselves. We're able to say, okay, I can do things. And part of that is finding a sense of purpose. Like we understand that we are here for some reason that we can fulfill. We have uh, something that we can contribute to the world, to our relationships, to other people, to our community, and to our families that has meaning and purpose for them. And it's going to improve our world to some degree. That's our purpose. That feels positive. So we feel a sense of value to others that really um, tends to really alleviate the sense of loneliness that comes from feeling extraneous in this world,
yeah,
even though many of us have been born into that situation.
yeah. It's fortunate that at some point you're able to um, gather your senses to a point where you're able to create a positive outcome for yourself. But then there are people who struggle for one reason or another, um, and continue in that distorted perception of where they fit in the world. There are people that are chronically catastrophizing the reality. In other words, imagining the worst. That they're a misfit. That they're not good enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, not big enough. Whatever it is, they're not enough for the world to accept. And so they isolate themselves to protect themselves from the rejection, which is another painful thing. Social media doesn't help with that. Uh, by creating what unrealistic uh, models for us. And then there's also the personalization, just by taking responsibility, blaming yourself for everything that people don't like, or for not being able to satisfy everyone in the world. You know, can you talk a little bit about some of those things that just keep people from actually making good connections and feeling fulfilled and satisfied with their current state.
Exactly. So if you happen to be one of the many people who are born into a situation where you were or feel like you are unwanted, then you have this sort of negative expectation about the world, right? And about your circumstances. I remember my Irish grandmother, who was an immigrant from Ireland, utterly impoverished, really struggled there and then escaped from there. So really a history of privation. Um, and I remember her saying, using sort of the statement, expect the worst and you'll never be disappointed.
Right.
And so the key was to just sort of anticipate negative events just to keep yourself from being vulnerable to a negative outcome and the negative feelings and sadness that would accompany negative outcomes because they had grown up in such hard circumstances. So growing up in trauma really predisposes us
Yeah.
to a tendency to anticipate negative outcomes with others, and it's important to sort of keep that in mind and understand that that's not really realistic. We can create uh,
I mean, it makes
a
a difference.
positive
Yeah, I
reality
mean,
if you want to. Yeah.
it makes a difference to ex- expect the worst and prepare for it. At least you be prepared, but as a way of giving up hope. Not, in other words, not letting your hopes up. Remember, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. People were afraid to get their hopes up because they don't want the disappointment. But what if you understand that the worst could happen, and yet you prepared for it while keeping your hopes up that they don't? In other words, focus on the outcome that you desire. Uh, that makes a significant difference in the quality of our life. Correct?
Oh, that's a huge insight. I mean, that's the law of actualization and visualization that everybody talks about these days. That really is very powerful. I mean, if we do choose to anticipate and visualize and really feel in our gut what it would be like to have what we would like to have and to be in the situation that we want to be in, to be successful, to have the relationship that we want to have, to live in the circumstances where we would like to live, to actually visualize that in our mind's eye and to feel what that would feel like in our gut, that actually can sort of nudge reality towards increasing the likelihood and the probability that that eventuality will actually occur. And that
Yeah.
has kind of been seen to happen. That's the kind of the law of visualization and the law of actualization that so many people have written about these days and is really significant. And that part of that is that positive visualization improves our mood, right? So we feel a little better when we
Yeah.
visualize a near future in which we are actually doing what we want to do and having what we want to have. We feel better, and then that increases our attractiveness to others. Others see that we're in a more positive mood. They tend to respond more positively to us. It creates this positive cycle that's self-reinforcing. And so you find, gee, my life is actually getting better just from
Yeah.
the process of sort of anticipating and visualizing, taking the risk of believing that the present and the future is going to be better than I might in the past have worried about it possibly being. So transitioning from the sort of the posture of lack and the posture of not being wanted to a posture of having value, having a plan, actually choosing to inhabit a world in which we are uh, manifesting all that we have the capacity to manifest.
Interesting. It's I want to talk when we come back. I want to talk about uh, how we sometimes overgeneralize and we draw from a certain experience, maybe even our own, to determine how things are going to go for us in the future. But don't go away. We're going to come right back and talk about uh, a way of reframing a lot of the things that have happened to us. Don't go away.
Master of words, powerful player, What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
And welcome back. You were talking about how we're thrown into this situation, and some of us feel unwanted, and it contributes to our sense of loneliness. And for some of us, it contributes to a sense of, I don't know, being self-sufficient and being okay with solitude. But I wanted to address an issue when we talk about uh, why some of us feel that we are not wanted. In many cases, that is the reality, that we weren't wanted, or at least we drew from from that experience at a very deeper level, cellular level, if you will, neurological level, if you will. Um, and I think it might have something to do with the priorities back in the day when our parents were having kids. It was not so much about the quality of life as it was maybe the way things looked. We wanted to have an ideal family. We wanted to look respectable. We wanted to keep up appearances, and and the underpinning, the main thing underlying everything was having to survive. So as opposed to today, we have the option to not just survive but to thrive. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Murphy?
Well, that's a deep observation, I think. Back in the day, I can remember, in the crowded sort of immigrant neighborhood that I grew up in, when the men would start to come home after work and they'd be sitting on the steps or standing around the steps of their house, and they were so proud just to have a place to live. These are people who had escaped largely or uh, from environments in Europe or other places in the world where their life was really uh, probably in danger, and they had come to America and they found a way to survive. They found a way to, even for them to uh, thrive in their mind. But
Yeah,
now we're into a totally different game. Now it's about much more than survival. We don't want to just survive. We want to be more than just people who get by. We
right.
want to be stars, if you will. Everybody wants to be the
Mhm.
star of their own show. And I think that's a very understandable sort of
Mhm.
ambition for people to have. We want to be able to not just have food to eat and a bed to sleep in and feel like really great about that. We want to feel like we're really accomplishing something. We are significant. We have a sense of significance. So the search for significance necessarily involves relatedness, right? So you're
Right.
significant only insofar as other people believe that you matter. So it puts us in that situation of being dependent on the responses of others to
Right.
our being and our way of managing ourselves, being recognized by others. That's the deal. And the power of social media is to determine for ourselves our sense of value as to whether we're recognized or not. So it's a much more complex
That
psychological
raises
entity we're involved in.
raises a really another big question. Let's just say, for example, that you discovered a cure for cancer, an immediate cure for cancer, and you had this knowledge, and you had protocols and lined up and things that people needed to do, which is a very significant uh, thing to offer the world. But let's just say the people that you were offering it to didn't understand it, didn't believe it, didn't accept it. Would that contribute to your sense of self-worth, even though you knew this? Just because they didn't accept it, that's not going to take away from what you know and how you feel about yourself, will it?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a deep idea. I think that interesting concept of whether you accomplish something or we accomplish something of value. Uh, you, you might be a school teacher of great value, but nobody recognizes it. I mean, nobody really cares. Nobody's paying attention. Nonetheless, you're having a positive effect, and you need to know that yourself. So that's that sense of psychological and emotional autonomy. I mean, are you able to support yourself in saying, I am doing something that is worthwhile? I say that what I'm doing has value to the world and to other people and to myself and to my loved ones, and therefore I'm able to continue down that path myself. That's psychological and emotional um, independence or autonomy, and that's the next level. That's a high level of psychological integration. When we're able to feel okay about ourselves without necessarily needing the recognition and approval of others. It- and that's something that we can learn to give to ourselves,
Yeah.
through positive visualization, through self-discipline, through recognizing and giving ourselves, the
It
pat
also
on the back
speaks
when we're
to
seeking progress.
it also speaks to the values that evolve within each of us. What do we value in life? What do we see as significant in life and important? And of course, we know that the values levels for every individual is not going to be the same. Well, there are different stratuses, among the global population of values. There's people that value survival more than thriving, or entrepreneurialism, or divine connection, divine oneness. All of these different values levels that create importance in each of our lives are what really drive us. But how do those values evolve through time? And can we influence each other, uh, and each other's values level?
Yes, this search that we're on, I mean, this life journey that we're on is fundamentally a search for value, right? You're saying that we're
Yeah.
really wanting, as we move through this lifetime that is given to us, we didn't even ask for it. We're just thrown here, as we were saying before. Here we are, and we're on this journey, and we're left with the obligation and the opportunity to determine for ourselves what the value of that path will be, and
Mhm.
realizing fundamentally that we're left with that decision for ourselves. I mean, that's work that each of us has to do for ourselves, in
Right.
emphasizing and really affirming our value, and and making choices in our life course that we believe are significant and will make a difference. And we can go back to our late adolescence, early adulthood, when we made the choices. Do I want to be an auto mechanic? Do I want to be a brain surgeon? Do I want to be a researcher in anthropology or something else like that? I mean, when we made those choices, we are
Mhm.
making choices about our purpose and meaning in terms of what we contribute to the world. And that sense of purpose and meaning sustains us through times of duress, emotional and psychological stress, when we
Yeah.
may find ourselves alone. I mean, we talked earlier about the ability to stand on your own feet, that sense of being able to stand on your own feet psychologically and emotionally, when you
Right.
really do need to carry on when nobody's clapping. I use the metaphor of the marathon. The marathon, you start out in the marathon, oh, great, I'm getting started, and you feel so good. And then at the end of the marathon, people are clapping and cheering. But in the middle of the marathon, it's really hard
It's really
because
good. Yes, and
you're
nobody knows
tired,
who went.
you're tired, you're not near the end, you still got a long way to go, but you
Yeah.
need to continue. So that's the key, having the strength to carry yourself through the middle of the marathon. And
Yes.
life hopefully is a marathon when we have a long time. And we'll talk about this whole process of, as we boomers age more and we approach the end of the marathon, what that means, in terms of the
Yeah.
choices that we make about how we use our energy.
It reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How we put value on as we get older, or as as the generations present themselves, and it just seems like at a certain point, it's not enough to be successful, to have money, to have possessions, to have all of the material, um, uh, uh, what do you call it? All of the material wealth and everything that people strive for. But at some point, we begin to feel the need to give back, to give to others. And then beyond that, we feel the need to connect with our Creator, to connect with God and pursue the divine oneness, if you will. And those are values throughout society in different pockets, maybe, of people. And for some who can't see past survival or past being socially accepted, the loneliness begins to rear its ugly head, if you will. How do you think our values play into that whole sense of of autonomy versus loneliness?
Yeah, one of the things that people used to say, in the World War II era and the World War I era and Vietnam, is that there aren't any atheists in foxholes. What does
No.
that mean? There aren't any atheists in foxholes. And they say that when the bullets are flying and you realize your life may end in the next few seconds or the few minutes, that's when it really counts. That's when you really have to see what you're made of in terms of what you believe in and what you need, what kind of belief system you need to have for yourself that will get you through those moments when your life really is in danger. And those things happen in less dramatic forms all through our lives, when whether we lose a job or whether we lose a loved one or whether we face some other kind of illness or strife, that sort of is like the foxholes of life. Those
Right.
situations of foxholes of living occur all through our lives, and we find, those of our listeners out there may find themselves in those foxholes many times, as all of us do throughout the course of our lives, when we face, really challenging circumstances, and then we have to make decisions about what we believe in, and that's when spiritual beliefs about meaning and purpose really count. That we believe that we know what to hold on to in those moments of high intensity and fear and anxiety.
I think we've touched on some really important topics that would probably make good for another show. When we come back, we're going to talk about individualism and the commodification of self, just to help people find their place. So don't go away.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
Welcome back. So we hope that you have enjoyed so far what we've been discussing today. If you do, please like and subscribe to this channel. Also, please comment your thoughts. We will eventually get to them, and we'll comment back on some of the things that any questions that may have been raised in our show. We're going to talk about now, in the last few minutes that we have, about the influence that capitalism, individualism, and the commodification of self have to do with how we feel about ourselves today. Do we feel isolated? Do we feel successful? Do we feel fulfilled? Are we satisfied? Are we okay to experience a level of solitude in the peaceful quiet of our mind, of our heart and mind? Dr. Murphy, what are your thoughts on what people value as success as opposed to what it really means to be autonomous and fulfilled as an individual?
Yeah, so one of the things that we talked about is the commodification of our value. I mean, that in a capitalist society, we tend to think, and other people, or we may think that other people think, that
Right?
our value is determined by the size of the house that we have, or the beauty of the car that we have, or the loveliness of the companion who we happen to be with, or how much money we have in our bank account, when in fact, those aren't the factors that really determine our meaning and purpose. When it comes to crunch time, when we're in the foxholes of our life and we find ourselves in circumstances where we really have to muscle up, as we used to say, and get through the moment as best we can. So certainly in a capital society, it does tend to objectify our value in that way, and so we feel a lack of self-worth. When in fact, we can go walk in the forest, we can go for a walk in the woods, and feel a sense of union with the world, the universe, with God, in all of its sacredness, and not have an ounce of loneliness at all,
For
because we
sure.
realize that we're part of something much larger than ourselves. And I think that that's the key with regard to the loneliness issue, is in whatever way we find that we feel that we are part of something larger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And many people have written about that in the past. There are volumes and volumes of books about that, meaning and significance being acquired and being experienced only in the process of feeling like you are a part of some activities that are of greater meaning and significance than our individual personal needs of the moment. Someone like Mother Teresa, she pops into mind that she was a person who came from poverty in Albania. She spent her whole life in service to others, had nothing at all. She had just a rag to put over herself, and that's all she had. And she had a life of great meaning and significance and purpose, and now is beatified as a saint in the Catholic Church. So I'm sure she went through her life in a way of great value, even though she accrued no material possessions whatsoever, and didn't seek fame or recognition or glory in any way. So it's that deeper sense of purpose, being part of something larger than ourselves, that fundamentally is, I think, the most reliable solution to the loneliness problem.
It's amazing. When you think about it, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the joy a little baby brings to us without even trying. They're not trying to make us feel good. They're not trying to make us feel happy. They're not trying to bring us joy. Their mere existence, them, surviving and thriving as a being, as a living entity, is enough. And as people of integrity, if you have integrity, you are whole and complete as you are, and the way you live your life, the way you decide to thrive, will bring joy, will send a positive ripple to the rest of the world. The way you live your life, the expression on your face, the way you present yourself to the world is enough to bring people that positivity and that charisma, I guess, for lack of a better word, that brings people to notice you and want to share time with you and learn more about you and maybe even emulate you at some point. What are your
So I
thoughts?
think, yeah, it's really good, and I hope that our listeners and watchers will find value in summarizing, some of the important points that we've made today. The first one being the importance of looking back on our own personal history,
Yeah.
and where did our foundation get established with regard to our own value? How did we feel in our families of origin in terms of whether we were wanted or unwanted, or whether we were valued, whether we were extraneous, whether we were the extra child or the unwanted child, or whether we were the king of the hill, the queen of the hill.
And
We
what
were
did
just
we do about it?
wanted. Yes, and we were the one who was great. So that just looking at that and getting a sense of how that has affected our fundamental sense of value for ourselves, looking at that first, and then starting to put that together with the skills that we can form in terms of taking action to engage in the positive visualization, the planning, the recognition of our successes, giving ourselves the approval, the
Yeah.
existential insight that we can do this ourselves. We have to make it meaningful ourselves. We can
Yes.
build a sense of value for ourselves, and we need to do that, doing that as the next step, and actually engaging in those practices, those
Right.
positive practices of daily activities to visualize how we're going to make this day, valuable, and
We
by
have
being
the opportunity.
something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely. We have the opportunity to be the change that we want to see in the rest of the world. So go do it. Take what you've got and make the best of it. Thanks
Thank
for
you so
being.
much. I appreciate all this, and it's great. And I hope all our watchers will like and subscribe, and feel free to communicate with us.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Take care. See you next week.
This has been Snippets of Wisdom with hosts Dr. Mike Corral and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Tune in and learn about the primary issues facing our society today and find the best chance of securing a stable and prosperous future. Snippets of Wisdom will enrich your life and the lives of all of your loved ones.